Well, with the real-time web, my experience at least has been that it's a very big conceptual change. But it's not, how would I put this, it's not something that is new by itself. When I first started blogging, for example, the first thing it did to me is it challenged the notion of the newspaper. It challenged the notion that I had to go and get my information from at a certain time of the day in a certain format. So no longer did I have to wait till 6 o'clock in the evening to catch the news program that told me what happened during the day. No longer did I have to wait for my morning newspaper at 7 a.m. to hear what happened in the US presidential election. Now, especially as the last several elections have taught us, through just following blogs and following online conversations, I can get a really good sense of what's happening in almost real time on blogs. And it's even caused now newspapers have started to have a huge blog component to their news sharing. And even sites like CNN's iReporter, they start to incorporate comments that are shared with readers of the site. Normally these would be people who would only be readers, now they've become participants. Twitter, Jaiku, and Friend Feed and other tools, they've kind of changed that again. I read recently that the big news events so far this year have been first broadcast on Twitter. They haven't been broadcast through traditional media channels. And that experience resonated perfectly with me with the Hudson River plane crash earlier this year. It was within a minute or so that there was an image of someone basically sitting in their apartment, watching out their window, obviously being completely startled to see this plane coming in, and they grabbed, I guess, a cell phone and took a quick image of it and posted it onto TwitPic. I mean, it was that fast. Before the plane really was even in the river, somebody was saying, this is what's happening, and it was on Twitter immediately. And I followed the initial conversation exclusively on Twitter. The reason was nothing else at the time was covering it. A second, much more tragic incident was with the Air France accident, or the Air France flight that crashed or disappeared, I guess, just a few days ago. I was sitting in an airport in Winnipeg, and I brought up Twitterific on my iPhone, and I was just sort of flipping through, and first announcement there was, plane missing, Air France. And so I immediately went to sites that I would normally trust. CBC News, CNN, nothing. There was nothing on those channels about this yet. So I kept following the feed on Twitterific, and somebody had, of course, signed a flight tag already to it. And someone says, oh, go to this site to see the most updated news. And I started following the entire incident in about a half hour before I left. Now, it was only when I got to Toronto, 2 hours later, that I was able to log on to a computer and then check online to see what was happening. And then there was a bit of information on some of the main news sites. What was interesting, though, I learned nothing new from these news sites. So if I'm someone who has a huge interest, obviously, in what's happening in an incident unfolding, Twitter is far, far superior for information sharing purposes than some of these structured news sites. But that's around significant events, right? That's around once in a lifetime or catastrophic events. That's not the only reason we use tools like Twitter for. I use Twitter heavily just for sharing information. Right? So I'll come across a link that I like. I don't want to write a blog post about it. I just want to say, hey, this is interesting. And so I quickly share it with people who are part of my network. If they like it, great. If they don't like it, no problem. So I think it's the immediacy of Twitter, but it's also one of the unique things about Twitter is one of the things that blogs never allowed me to do was to get to know people. You could know them somewhat through their ideas, but you would only know them intellectually or by emotions. They would say, oh, this really ticks me off, I don't like whatever. All of a sudden Twitter comes along, and now I could know them by their life. And what I mean by that is it became that morning water cooler conversation you used to have. The guy that would say, I hate bagels, oh, I love espresso, or I enjoy this, or I saw this movie last night, it was whatever. Pieces of information that were too insignificant to share on a blog, but extremely personal, that helped me to form a relationship about a human being. And so what that end has done is it's generated in a short period of time a sense of social cohesion that I never had in 7-8 years of blogging. And now I've found in less than a year on Twitter that I know people that I follow on Twitter far better because I know their likes and dislikes. Before I just knew their thoughts. And now I get to know them as a person, as a personality. So that's been one significant change as well. Otherwise, this is one thing that I found for me at least, was to recognize Twitter emulates the flow of information, which means I'd have blogs that I would read regularly, and I'd go to the site, follow, or my blog reader, I would follow what had been happening, which meant that I could follow the development of a person's thought consistently. I would never miss a blog post by certain prominent bloggers, right? So, I would follow your work, I would follow Stephen Downs, Darcy Norman, Brian Lamb, Alec Koros, pick a raft up, Grania Knoll out of UK, Janet Clary, who's with Brandon Hall. I'd follow these people and I would always know when they had posted. With Twitter, you gain a real sense of how tremendous the information flow is. And I've said before that I'm okay following just 1% of what happens on Twitter. I can't follow Twitter the way I follow a blog. Twitter, I sample. When I'm on Twitter, I read what's happened in the last little bit, I go on. I can't keep track of what everyone has done because there's too much being shared. So I found Twitter to be a big conceptual shift for me, in that I've had to recognize that I can't keep track. I've had to be at peace with myself to only follow 1% of what's happened, and to recognize that it's okay. Even that 1% is important to me, but I just don't have the time to follow the full breadth of it. So your question of what is it about the real-time web? Is it just a fad? Is it something? My response would be, Twitter may be a fad, right? It may come and go the way many other tools have, but the notion of being able to connect socially, connect consistently, the ability to connect informally with it just being part of my work routine, not having to write a blog post to talk about it, that I think is far more than a fad. I think that the real-time information, the real-time awareness of what's happening, the close connection with friends and family through a tool like Twitter, that I think is a fundamental shift in how we communicate.